Silence. It's kind of awkward, isn't it? How many of you thought I forgot my sermon? A couple of hands.
I just wondered why you didn't smile.
How many of y'all thought I forgot where I was? Silence is an awkward thing, isn't it? It makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't like silence too much, do we? Sometimes it's good. Sometimes you need a little peace and quiet. But in general, silence kind of makes us uncomfortable. A lot of times we like to have background noise. How many of us have TVs running in our house and we're not even watching them? Just so there's some noise there. Or the radio playing, just because we don't want to just dead silence. It makes us feel a little uncomfortable. But silence is also a way of drawing our attention to things, isn't it? Doesn't it make us kind of focus? I had all y'all's attention, I can tell you, just from looking at you. I don't know what you were thinking. I don't want to know. but I had your attention without a doubt. You ever been in a room where a teacher was speaking, or maybe a business meeting where somebody's giving a presentation and all of a sudden they get quiet? Somebody's talking over to the side, and all of a sudden the speaker just gets quiet and look. I know some of you teachers have done it. Just get quiet and look. And all of a sudden, everybody's all right. He gets everybody's attention. He gets everybody to refocus, right? That silence gets us to refocus. And if you're that person talking, you're totally like, wow, I hope they just keep going. I'll shut up. You got my attention, please don't say anything about me talking. But that's what it is. Silence has that thing. It's a way of redirecting our focus, I guess. Which is a good thing, right? Sometimes we all need to refocus. But what about when God's silent? What about when you lift something up in prayer and there just doesn't seem to be an answer? What about when God's silent? Does that mean He's not there? Do you think He took His 15-minute break? I'm just going to take a 15-minute break. Or I'll be back in an hour, put the sign up. Somebody take a message for me, cut the answer machine on. Peter, will you write messages down? I'll get to them later. You think He's not there listening? No. Not at all. God's there. He's always present. Right? He doesn't take a break. He doesn't take holidays off. He's always there. And He's always listening. He always hears what you have to say. Sometimes we probably wish He didn't hear what we had to say. Sometimes when He doesn't answer our prayers in a timely manner, we really wish He didn't hear what we were thinking or what was in our hearts. Right? Sometimes we're not real patient with God. We want things now. I prayed for Him. I gave Him a list. So like a kid, where's the results? Right? But He's always listening. He always hears what we have to say. Kind of like the gentleman who's here and ain't gone back. His doctor gave him a hearing aid and said, go try this out before we can come back and let me know how it works out. And he came back and the doctor said, gave him a few tests. He said, your hearing seems to be 100%. How's it working out for? I bet your family's really excited that you can hear now. He said, I ain't told. He said, I've just been sitting around listening to all their conversations. He said, I've changed my will 3 times this week. Aren't you glad that God doesn't change His will when we get upset with Him, say things we shouldn't? He understands. He understands we have our imperfections. But what He wants you to know is He is listening. And He does care. And He loves each and every one of you. And each and every one of you is important to Him. And though the answer may not come in the timely manner that you want, the answer will come. You see, God works off His time frame, not your time frame. He works on His will, not your will. There's no magical wand that you can wave and get God to do something. It doesn't work like that. Although sometimes we wish that we would, don't we? Today we're going to be taking a look at a verse or a chapter in Exodus. We're going to be dealing with the Israelites. They have been enslaved at this point in their life. They're enslaved in Egypt, and they're crying out. Now let's read what Exodus 22, chapter 2, verse 23 has to say about that. It says, during the long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So here we have Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrew people, and they're enslaved in Egypt. And things, of course, as a slave are never really good, I guess. That's not a job anybody aspires to be. When I grew up, I want to be a slave. But so things aren't going well, and so they're crying out because their living conditions are unpleasant, because they don't like their life situation. And so they're crying out to God. Now what it doesn't say here is it doesn't say that God comes down and immediately fixes it, does it? No. But what it does say is that God, what? He heard them. Exactly. God hears them, and he is concerned about them. Just like God hears you and is concerned about you. And what you don't read here, but if we went back in time to the beginning of chapter 2, we would see here the story about this little baby who's put in a basket and saved from being killed and sent down the water and is rescued by Pharaoh's daughter and is raised up. And his name is Moses. You see, before the people even cried out for help, God had already put into plan, already put into works, a solution to the problem. You see, God is the beginning and the end, and everything in between. But unfortunately for the Israelites, they were going to have to wait 12 chapters before they got saved. They don't get saved in chapter 3 or chapter 4 or chapter 5 or chapter 6. 12 chapters before they're saved. But God has already put in motion a plan to save them. He's already moved Moses into the Pharaoh's house. You see that? So long before they even knew they had a problem, God was at work. Long before you ever know you have a problem, or you need God, because you always need God, but long before you have an exact need, God is at work on your solution. He's working to fix it. Now sometimes you say, well, it doesn't come that quick. You know, if he was working ahead of time, he should have already had a solution for me, and it should have already been fixed, and I don't know what the delay is, and I mean, what kind of timetable is God's on? He's on his timetable, not yours. And he's working. He's working, and he's moving on your behalf. Now, why would he do that? Let me see. I know he dislikes you a lot. So he says, well, I'm going to help them out. Or he says, you know, I don't care about them, so I'm going to help them out. He loves you. We already know that. Because we know how at least part of the story ends on a cross some years later on our behalf, right? So we know God loves us. And we know that he loves us so much that he sent his only son to be crucified on a cross for us, that we can have a relationship with him for eternity. Right? And that's why he's always moving on our behalf. He's always at work on our behalf, even when you don't see it. Sometimes you got to wait to get to chapter 14 in your life to get the answer. Sometimes the answer to your prayer is not going to be answered right this minute. Sometimes it's wait, right? And have you ever experienced that in your life? Hmm? Have you ever experienced that where you pray for something and nothing happened? Or something happened, but it wasn't what you wanted to happen. And then a year or two later, you have one of them aha moments. You know? Oh, now I get it. Now I know why God didn't let me marry that person. They were an axe murderer. He was looking out for me. You know? Whatever the situation is. But have you ever had those moments? Because I've had those moments like, oh, wow. If I hadn't, then I never would have. And then, wow, look where God's brought me. Look where I'm standing. Look at how He's blessing me today because of all those things I didn't understand in the past. Hindsight 2020, that's where it comes from, I think. We can all look back and see. But what we have to understand is when we're standing in the present, that we have to understand and have the faith to understand that God's at work for us. You see, He was already working with Moses. In the next couple of chapters, in chapter 5, he's moved over to, I think, Moses kills, not chapter 5, but Moses kills a man who's abusing a slave, and he hides him in the sand, and somebody sees that he's killed him, so he flees from Pharaoh, and he's living in Midian, and he sees these folks picking on the daughter of Jethro, who's watering the sheep. And Moses goes and takes care of them, runs them off, and waters the sheep for her, which is kind of a precursor for what's going to happen shortly when he starts taking care of the Israelites, right? He's going to take on one of the biggest bullies of all time, the Pharaoh. He's going to take him on, just like he took those bullies on. And then he's going to spend 40 years in the desert taking care of God's sheep. Right? The Israelites. So God's working in Moses' life, moving him to where He wants him to be so he can take on Pharaoh. And then He appears to him in a burning bush. And Moses says, what God are you talking to me? Can you imagine that burning bush experience? Think about that. Hearing a voice coming out of a burning bush. How many of you would have stuck around? No. Anybody? Because I'd have been running. I mean, that bush would have been chasing me down. That would have probably been the first wildfire. It would have spread across and chasing me down. But and he says, who are you? And he says, I am. I am. Now, that's not supposed to be like Abbott and Costello, like who's on first. It's not supposed to come across like that. I am is the first person for Yahweh. He's the God of the covenant. Right? He's reminding Moses, I'm the covenant. I'm the God of Abraham. That's who I am. You got to remember, there's a lot of gods being worshipped during that time. And especially in that foreign land. And actually, a lot of the plagues that will come to pass, and the things that will happen, will actually be God showing His dominance over some of those worship gods of that time. There's some battles going to be going on. Right? And so He gets Moses, and Moses goes where? To see Pharaoh, right? And he says what? Let my people go. And Pharaoh says, wow, thank you for bringing this injustice to my eyes. I mean, I didn't know they were being abused or having to... Sure, go, right? That's what he says. Yeah, no. Pharaoh says, take away their straw and they're making bricks with it. If Moses was a union negotiator, he'd be out of a job, I'll tell you right now. Right? You ask for something, let my people go. No, we're going to make it worse. We're going to make it worse on your people. We're going to make their lives harder instead of better. Wow. You ever prayed for something and your life got harder? Didn't work the way you thought it would? That's what's happening. You ever prayed for your children? Maybe they've wandered off from God. They're not as close to God as you have to be. And you pray for them to return to God. They just get farther away from God. You ever pray for God to provide for your needs and you just seem to go deeper in debt? That means he's not listening. Working his timetable, his plan. You gotta keep that faith. Because even though it doesn't make any sense to you, keep praying. So I already prayed, it didn't work. It's not a magical wand. Keep praying. Keep bringing it to God. You're not wearing him out. You can't wear God out. You keep bringing that prayer before God. Because he's working on your behalf. And he wants you to open up your eyes and see what he's got. Does that mean he's not going to answer the prayer? Sometimes we have to go into bad times to be drawn closer to God. Because it's in those deep hours, those hours when we know we can't do it ourselves. Then we know we have to depend on God. When there's nothing else left, when the despair and the hopelessness seem to overwhelm us, that's when God said, don't forget me. I'm right here. And I love you. And I'm going to get you through this. Just be faithful and trust me. Because I'm working on your behalf. And we're only on chapter 7. And we got to get to 14 before I can rescue you. Where are you at in your chapter of your book? You headed towards 14? You still stuck around 2? We're all working to get to 14 when that prayer gets answered, right? That's what we want. That's what we're striving for. Sometimes you're going to go through some difficult times. But God sends Moses to Pharaoh again. Or actually at the same time. Aaron throws down his rod, right? And it becomes what? A dragon? Just check. A snake. So it becomes a serpent. And then what happens? Then Pharaoh says, so what? He calls his guy, and his guy throws down his staff. And it becomes a snake. So we got a snake fest going on. Again, I'm out of the room. So we had the snake thing going on. You see, the snake, the cobra, was a sign of power. It was a deity that was worshipped in Egypt. It's an important thing to know. Now, what happens then? It's kind of significant. Anybody remember? Moses' snake, or Aaron, one Aaron eats the other snake. Gives him a little power line. But it shows that God, Yahweh, is the God to be worshipped. You may think you got power. God, Yahweh, is the one true God and is a powerful God. And the only God to be worshipped. But Pharaoh is a hard guy to convince. It says his heart was hardened. He didn't want to hear about it. And so they send plagues. Plagues, we have boils, we have hail, we have all kinds of plagues coming, right? We have frogs and gnats and flies. There's all kinds of plagues that come to Egypt to try to convince Pharaoh to let God's people go. And yet he refuses. You talk about hard-headed, right? You talk about hard heart, hard-headed. God keeps throwing these things at him and says, look, I'm just telling you, it's going to keep getting worse for you until you change your mind. And Moses keeps coming and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no. Or they used to tell the kids and said, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no way, dude. Ain't happening. Not letting them go. But another god that was worshiping them was the sun. Ray was the god of the sun. What did God do? One of the plagues was he darkened the sky. Showed that he was more powerful. They also worship the god of Habib, which is the protector of the Nile. And what did God do to the Nile? Turned it to blood. See, a lot of those plagues had significance in those times. It was showing that I am the one, the only, the God to be worshipped. Even Pharaoh himself was seen as a God incarnate. And what did God do to his firstborn son? Kill him. Because there's only one God. Yahweh, the God of Abraham. Our God. The same God that we pray to. The same God that loves you, that loves me. Same God that is slowly at work for the Israelite, for the Hebrew people, is slowly at work sometimes for us too. And sometimes we have to wait. And sometimes it seems like God is silent. But in that silence, He's working for us. And one day we'll get to chapter 14. And the answer will be clear. And the prayer will be answered. Just as it is in Exodus 14. Where when the Israelites are facing the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. The Egyptian army at that time was one of the most powerful armies on the planet. And you're sandwiched between that and the Red Sea. And what does God do? He parts the sea. He parts the sea. But not only does He part the sea, when the Israelites get to the other side and the Egyptians are following to overtake them, what does He do? He closes the door, doesn't He? And the army is destroyed. One of the greatest armies on the planet. That's a pretty powerful God. That's the most powerful God. That's the God I want on my side. That's the God that I worship. The all-powerful, all-present, all-working God who loves us all very much. But He simply asks for us to be patient sometimes. To be still in the quietness of the silence. Which, as we all found out a few minutes ago, is very awkward and very uncomfortable, isn't it? Because we live in a now society that says, I want everything right now. And if I've waited 5 seconds for it, that's way too long. But God doesn't work on that timetable, my friends. But He is working. And you can put your hope in that. You can put your faith in that. You can bet your house on that He's working on your behalf. Because you, each and every one of you, even those of you who are praying right now, each and every one of you are important to Him. He loves you that much. And He's working to get you to chapter 14. And all God's people said, Amen.